All right, this is Melissa Dare. Here is my audience for my speech.
Ah! Yeah. You're stuck with me no matter what.
That's great. Consider the following examples. A dad hires a preschool admissions coach when his child is 1 year old, fills out preschool application essays, and pays upward of $40,000 a year for an elite preschool experience. Or consider the mom who actually enrolled in all of the same college classes as her daughter to make sure her daughter gets all of her work done. These people sound crazy, but what do they have in common with all of us? They love their kids. We've all done a few crazy things for our kids. Maybe we've refereed a fight between two toddlers when they're fighting over a toy. Maybe we've helped our kids fill out a job application, or even helped them with their college application essays. These are things that usually happen, though, while the children are young, to help them learn how to navigate so that they're better prepared for the next time. But what happens when there's not a next time? Helicopter parents are described as parents who hover over their children, not letting anything bad happen to them. The newest trend in parenting is called lawnmower parenting or snowblower parenting. This is where parents jump in front of their kids and remove all obstacles out of their way, making sure their kid has a straight shot to success. But these are all examples of over-parenting. And I totally get it. I'm a mom. I love my kids. But we have to remember that the results of our parenting today are going to affect not just the generations to come, but also ourselves. Therefore, I propose that failing to allow our children to fail is in all actuality failing to allow our children to succeed. I'm going to talk to you about how overparenting is affecting emerging adults, why challenges are necessary for growth, how self-determination theory affects child outlook on self-motivation, and what message and legacy we're leaving behind for our children. Do you remember what it was like when you left high school and headed off to start your life? You were excited, you were ready, but then real life hit hard. School classes can be really hard. Maybe your boss is super demanding. Maybe your roommate's a jerk. You have bills to pay. And suddenly, you got to figure all of these things out. But if you're like me, you likely had most of the tools you needed. You knew you could sit down with your professor and work out a plan for extra credit. You knew you could apply for a job to pay for your bills. You knew that maybe you could even sit down with your roommate and reach a compromise, right? But what if you didn't have these tools? It would be the equivalent of a surgeon showing up to perform an operation, reaching into his bag and finding kitchen utensils. But that's exactly what we're doing to our kids today. When children haven't experienced failure and pain in their early years, in their later years, they're unable to problem solve, they're unable to mediate relationships, they're unable to self-motivate, and they can't accept fault for anything that happens to them. In a survey of 1,500 college students, 11% of them said their parents had contacted their employer to solve a work problem. 16% of them said that their parents have called or texted to make sure they were awake for class or for their job. And 75% said their parents still make their haircut appointments, doctor, dentist appointments, and remind them of all of their school deadlines. This leads me to my second point, which is the fact that having no conflict in your life leads to weakness, but having challenges leads to confidence. I have a story about my cute little godson who's actually here tonight. Baby Ryan is learning to walk. He's doing great, but sometimes he gets frustrated and he just wants that toy that's down the hallway. And when he does, he falls right on his butt and he cries. What would happen if every time he did that, his parents picked him up and took him to that toy? Or they picked up the toy and they brought it to him? He'd never learn how to walk. Our job as parents is to create a growth mindset in our children, and challenges are what actually lead to this growth mindset. Here's a quote. A child who believes intelligence can be changed when effort is applied does not attribute failure to lack of ability, but instead to lack of effort. Kids must fail in order to grow, and we as parents must let them. Author Julie Lythcott-Haims puts it this way: the point is to prepare our kid for the road instead of preparing the road for our kid. Now, the ability to be internally motivated is what psychologists refer to as self-determination theory. And this theory consists of three components. The first is the need for autonomy, which is independence. The second is the need for competence, which is their confidence. And the third is their relatedness, the need to have an equal relationship. When parents do too much for their kids, it does not allow them to develop their self-determination theory. And in that case, the child learns three lessons. Number one, we make their choices for them, so they lack independence. Number two, when they do make choices, they mess it up. They're not good enough to do it on their own, so they lack confidence. And that messes up the relationship between the parent and the child. And they learn that they have very little control over things that concern them. So, with that in mind, we have to think about what legacy and what message we're leaving to our kids. Last month, 35 parents were convicted in the Operation Varsity Blues scandal. They paid someone to create fake SAT scores, they rigged ACT exams, and they falsified sports qualifications so that their kid could get into an elite college. Now, what message did that send to those kids? You couldn't do it on your own. I will fix things for you, and you are entitled to whatever you want, no matter how much work you put into it. Is this the legacy we want to leave for our kids? Now, what is a legacy? I have to quote my favorite musical, Hamilton, when it says, "Legacy is planting seeds in a garden you never get to see grow." What kind of garden are we cultivating in our children? One that's overgrown with weeds of doubt, entitlement, fear, and competence? Or one that blossoms with confidence, hard work, perseverance, and responsibility? So we've talked about the problems that are facing emerging adults when they are overparented. We talked about why kids need challenges. We talked about the role of self-determination theory on their self-internal motivation. And we talked about the importance of legacy. But I want to leave you with one final story. There's a famous anecdote about a man who sees a butterfly emerging from a cocoon. The butterfly struggles and struggles, but about halfway through the process, he stops. The man gets scared, and he's worried that it's not going to happen, so he grabs some scissors, and he cuts the cocoon, and he lets the butterfly out. But instead of a beautiful creature, he sees the butterfly come out with deformed wings, and he's unable to fly. And what that man didn't know was that the process of struggling to get out of that cocoon is what actually pushes the blood and the nutrients into the butterfly's wings and allows him to go off and be exactly who he was meant to be. The same thing applies to our children. We have to allow them to struggle so that they can learn to fly. Thank you.